Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Who is firing? Who is responsible?
Five days since the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, what does the country look like? The pictures are heartbreaking, especially those involving children. You must have seen these. The situation is so desperate that parents are giving up babies to complete strangers. I saw the first of these images yesterday and I haven't been able to get them out of my mind since. Can you imagine what it takes for a parent to give away their child just in the hope that they survive somewhere else? It's sad beyond words. The Kabul airport is flooded with people hoping to leave. Back in the city, the Taliban are carrying out door-to-door searches to look for those who worked with NATO forces and foreign missions. At the same time, they want good press. They want imams to tell the people of Afghanistan to not leave the country. They want the world to believe they've reformed and evolved. The fact is, they're still trying to figure out themselves. There are many Taliban groups and no single authority in Afghanistan at the moment. They all wield guns. And they make contradictory statements, even on the holding of elections and exploring a democratic process. We'll bring you up to speed with what's happening there, what they're doing and saying. Also on the show tonight, what role did Pakistan's ISI play in the Taliban takeover of Kabul? We bring you a special report. What is China's Afghanistan game? The mineral wealth. The Taliban are sitting on minerals worth $1 trillion, including rare earths like lithium. That's what the Chinese want. What about India? What are New Delhi's priorities and biggest worries? Tonight we discuss India's Afghanistan strategy. And most of us in India and elsewhere expect doctor appointments, medical tests and results almost instantly. Guess how much the Brits have to wait to see a doctor or get a test done? There's a waiting list of 306,000 people, more than 3 lakh people. We begin with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Even as a UN document says that the Taliban are going house to house, searching for opponents and their families, US President Joe Biden says that there are greater threats than the Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, including Syria. The death toll from an attack on civilians and the military in Burkina Faso rises to 80 people, after terrorists raided a civilian convoy in the latest attack across West Africa's Sahel region this month. Malaysia's king appoints Ismail Sabri Yaakob as the prime minister at a time when the nation is battling a surge in COVID-19 cases, followed by an economic slump. The appointment brings back to power a party tainted by graft allegations. Syrian state media says the military confronted Israeli aggression in Damascus against Israel of firing missiles. A Britain-based war monitor says that these missiles targeted military positions of Lebanese Shiite movement Hezbollah. Israeli military has not commented on the reported strike yet. Sri Lanka announces a 10-day lockdown as a surge in cases and related deaths overwhelmed the health system. This after pressure from health experts and public figures calling for a national lockdown to curb infections. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has found scant evidence that the deadly January 6th Capitol attack was the result of a coordinated plot against the presidential election result. The FBI believes the violence was not centrally coordinated by extremist groups or supporters of former President Donald Trump. A radio journalist was shot dead outside his home in the Mexican Gulf coast of Veracruz. Jacinto Romero wrote about local politics, and reports suggest he had received threats for his work. In another stark sign of the climate crisis, rain fell on the summit of Greenland's ice cap for the first time on record. This was the heaviest rainfall on the ice sheet since record-keeping began in 1950. 20-time Grand Slam champion Rafael Nadal has pulled out of the US Open and also announced that he will not play again in 2021 due to a left foot injury. The injury has troubled him since his semi-final defeat at the French Open and led to his withdrawal from Wimbledon and the Tokyo Olympics. In a social media statement, the 35-year-old said that he needed time to recover in order to prolong his career. Defending champion Dominic Thiem and Roger Federer also pulled out of the US Open earlier this week. Lionel Messi must wait to make his much-anticipated debut for Paris Saint-Germain after being left out of the squad for Friday's French League clash against Brest. The six-time World Player of the Year has been training with the Parisians for over a week now since his transfer from Barcelona, but head coach Mauricio Pochettino believes that he is not match fit yet. The 34-year-old Argentine legend is now likely to make his PSG debut next weekend against Reims.
5 days ago, the Taliban took power by force in Afghanistan. They installed themselves in the presidential palace. They proclaimed a new Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. In the last 5 days, the world has been playing a guessing game. How will the Taliban run Afghanistan? Will women be allowed in the so-called government? What happens to the democratically elected leaders of Afghanistan? These are difficult questions to answer, even for the Taliban, because they're not a monolith. There are a bunch of many factions, largely clueless about what to do with the power they've grabbed. And they face serious challenges. Number one, the Taliban can't seem to agree on a way to govern. Look at their statements. One says they cannot rule out elections. Another says there will be no democracy and that a council will call the shots. Challenge number two, the Taliban don't have legitimacy to rule. Now, you would think that they do not care about legitimacy, but this is not 1996. This is 2021. They don't have the money to run the country. So they need good press. The Taliban are engaging with Afghan politicians. They're asking imams or religious leaders to appeal for unity. They want support. They want a semblance of consensus to rule. Challenge number three, the Taliban are insecure. Even after promising amnesty, they're going after potential rivals and defectors. They've launched a door-to-door manhunt to find people who worked with foreign forces. And we're tracking developments on all these fronts. We've been telling you about the tentative revival of a political process in Kabul. The Taliban want to rule Afghanistan. They just don't know how to. The shape and nature of the regime is still unclear. They're making conflicting statements. Look at what they've said in the last 2 days. A senior commander of the Taliban has declared that Afghanistan will not be a democracy anymore, which means no election and no parliament. The commander said that a ruling council will be installed, similar to what Afghanistan had in the late 1990s. That's when the Taliban were in charge. Reports say that Haibatullah Akhundzada will be put in charge. Now, Akhundzada is the third supreme commander of the Taliban, and he could lead this ruling council full of imams. But that's not a given, because a Taliban spokesperson has said the exact opposite. Don't rule out democracy, he says. Suhail Shaheen, he was speaking to the Chinese state broadcaster, and he refused to rule out an election in the future. So clearly the Taliban are still trying to figure out who they are and what they'll do. Will they run an autocratic ruling council, or will they explore a democratic process? They're engaging with prominent Afghan politicians. On your screen are pictures from a recent meeting. Former Afghan President Hamid Karzai hosted the Taliban. Chairman of the High Council for National Reconciliation, Abdullah was also present. What did the two sides discuss? Security of Afghan citizens and national unity, or so we are told. What do these meetings indicate? That it's very much possible that the Taliban will install an authority with previously elected politicians on board. Now that they've grabbed power, they want endorsement. For this, the Taliban have roped in imams or Muslim clerics. Remember, today is the first Friday since the takeover. People flock to Friday prayers, and here the imams have been asked to counter negative reports about the Taliban. They also want to stop Afghans from leaving the country and have asked the imams to make an appeal on their behalf. But will such appeals help if the Taliban don't stop perpetrating violence? The first sign on a protest, and they rain bullets. At least 3 protesters were killed in Jalalabad when they tried to take down the Taliban's flag and unfurl the Afghan national flag. Plus, the revenge killings continue. The Taliban have now launched a manhunt for political detractors. The United Nations has received an assessment. It says the Taliban are going from door to door, looking for those who worked with NATO forces, the Americans or the Afghan government. All of them are on the radar. These people are being killed. Their families are being threatened. The Western governments who hired them have now left them to die. Embassies have abandoned local staff. It's beyond shameful. Translators, analysts, service staff, they've all been left to their fate in Kabul. Look at what happened at the Dutch mission. Their diplomats left without even telling their local colleagues. The Dutch foreign minister later told his country's parliament that the communication equipment at the mission broke down. What a sorry excuse. And this is not even the worst case. According to one journalist, Swedish diplomats and embassy officials refused to answer calls from their Afghan staff. Even their official emails were blocked. Those who worked at Western missions fear for their lives now. After promising amnesty, the Taliban are going after them. Even journalists and their families are not being spared. We saw what they did with Indian journalist Danish Siddiqui, killed him in cold blood. And now they're targeting others. Today, the Taliban conducted a door-to-door search for a journalist. He's not in Afghanistan anymore, but his family is. So they went after the family, killed one of his relatives, and seriously injured another. So much for promising to uphold the rights of journalists. Things they said in the much-publicized press conference on Tuesday. It was a bunch of lies, we told you. It took them 3 days to break their word. Going after journalists who feature on their hit list, that's what the Taliban are doing, and that's because they want to rule by fear. Look at this. They're the Taliban's special forces, men with guns marching on the streets to show who is in command now. They're dressed in white, wielding what look like advanced weapons. We cannot confirm where this was shot. But what we can see is this. An internet-savvy Taliban of 2021 using both guns and social media to spread their message. They say every war is a war against children. They lose their family, their education, and most importantly, the joy of childhood. Afghanistan knows this all too well. Multiple generations have lost their childhood to war here, and we have another one in the making now. What I'm about to show you tonight are the most haunting images from Kabul airport. The images of babies being handed over to complete strangers, soldiers. As a parent, it's impossible to imagine this. How desperate would a mother be to hand over her child to a stranger in the hope that the child lives? This is what it has come to. This is what parents in Afghanistan are doing. They're trying to get their children out to save them from oppression. And I have to warn you, these pictures are not easy to watch. Here's an Afghan man passing his baby over the airport wall. On the other side are American soldiers. Think about the desperation. A parent passing their baby over barbed wire to a stranger, let that sink in. And this wasn't an isolated incident. Take a look at this video from Thursday. Another child being passed over the airport wall. What happens to these children? Where do they go? Who will take care of them? Who will raise them? Will Western countries take them in? Britain says it will not. Defence Minister Ben Wallace confirmed that unaccompanied children will not be evacuated. So what's the plan here? Will they leave them at the gates or hand them over to the Taliban? This is not a miscalculation or a logistical nightmare. This is apathy. Just take a look at the Kabul airport. Thousands of people banging at the gates, some of them trying to climb the walls. Do you know what the Americans did? They fired tear gas, as if this was some protesting mob. The Taliban probably felt ignored, so they joined the crackdown, firing live shots to disperse the people. You can see the chaos from the air. Look at these satellite images. The roads outside the airport are completely blocked. Inside, dozens of planes are preparing for takeoff. Most of them have Western personnel and Western allies. The US says it is now evacuating 3,000 people per day. Impressive numbers. But what about these people stranded outside? Remember, this is their airport. It belongs to the people of Afghanistan, but the US has cancelled commercial flights, blocked off the gates and walls. While they continue with their evacuations, the people of Afghanistan will never forget this betrayal.
I've been stuck here for the past 2 days. I'm trying to get in. I went to the Americans. They pushed me out. They kicked me out. I went to the Germans. They beat me out with the sticks. They fired us. You see, you see these gas fires that they make you cry.
Tear gas.
And this was just one account. Our correspondent Anas Malik visited the Kabul airport today. Everyone he met, everybody told the same story of hopelessness and abandonment. Listen in.
I'm standing outside the western gate of the Kabul airport. This is the military side. This is heavily being guarded by the Afghan Taliban by and large. And you'd see patrols of them going on. Aerial firing being done in order to control the crowd. These images to my right, the place where you've seen images of people giving away their children in a bid to secure them. Thousands and thousands of people are currently literally outside. I've met families in despair, in desperation, those who are criticizing the US as well on the whole process. And they say they've been here for weeks now. They say that they're waiting for their turn, and they are criticizing the lack of cooperation from both the sides. Anas Malik in Kabul, Afghanistan, for WION, World is One.
The Kabul airport is a humanitarian disaster. The West may not admit it, but pictures don't lie. At least 10 people have died at the airport this week. There is tear gas, live firing, and children being passed over barbed wire. Every time a plane takes off, the crowd scream in unison. Another plane has abandoned them. By the end of August, the Americans will leave. What happens to the airport then? If the Taliban take control, will they let Afghans leave? Well, no one knows. The Americans may be willing to wait and watch, but Afghans do not have that luxury. They are stuck in no man's land. On one side, the Western troops who have shut the airport gates. On the other, the Taliban using guns and threats to keep them from leaving. And providing ammo to these guns and threats is Pakistan and its rogue spy agency, the ISI. It played a crucial role in the takeover of Kabul and is now said to be advising the Taliban on how to impose authority. The ISI is also helping Pakistani terrorists build a base in Kabul. Some of them have already sworn allegiance to the Taliban, like the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. In a press release, the TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, have said that the Taliban's so-called victory against the US is a victory for the entire Muslim community. The Prime Minister of Pakistan seems to agree. In a recent press conference, Imran Khan said the Taliban have broken the chains of slavery in Afghanistan. Here's a report.
Much has been said about the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan and America's failure in preventing this from happening. But very little is being said about the role Pakistan played. For months, Afghanistan's deposed Vice President Amarullah Saleh and several members of the Ashraf Ghani government highlighted the role Pakistan's ISI was playing in guiding the Taliban. In July, there were reports of the ISI pushing terrorists into Afghanistan. Pakistani terrorists were even sighted in the border provinces of Ghazni, Khost, Logar, Paktia and Paktika. But America was too busy securing its interests. The same month, pro-Taliban rallies were held in Peshawar. Flags of the Islamic Emirate were unfurled in public. Even Pakistani lawmakers exposed their government's role in aiding the Taliban, like Pakistan's Interior Minister Sheikh Rashid, who told Geo News in a TV interview that Talibs injured in fighting get treated at Pakistani hospitals.
उनकी बाज़ डेड बॉडीज भी आ जाती हैं, बाज़ मेडिकल ट्रीटमेंट के लिए भी लोग, बाज़ हॉस्पिटल्स ऐसे हैं जहां उनकी ट्रीटमेंट होती है. सो ये सारी सूरत हाल पाकिस्तान को देखें 40 साल से, जो बल्कि 70 साल से ही आप लगाएं.
Despite such overwhelming evidence, the stakeholders in Afghanistan did nothing to stop Islamabad. The result is this: a terror regrouping in Afghanistan. Terrorists of all hues have reached Kabul to make the fallen capital their base. Orchestrating this regrouping is Pakistan's deep state, led by the Inter-Services Intelligence, the ISI. It is pushing terrorists from Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Jangvi and the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan into Afghan soil. The Emir of Tehreek-e-Taliban, Noor Wali Mahsood, who operates from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, has renewed his oath of allegiance to the Taliban. In a press release, he has called America's defeat a victory for the entire Muslim community, pledging that the TTP will not spare any sacrifice for the stability of the restored Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Advisors from the Pakistani army are currently stationed in Kabul to guide the Taliban in consolidating its control. At the same time, Pakistan's deep state is selling the Taliban's takeover as a victory of jihad to convince Pakistani youth to join its operations in Afghanistan. India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar has warned the United Nations Security Council about this unholy alliance.
In spite of the progress we have made to tighten the legal, security, financing and other frameworks to combat terrorism, terrorists are constantly finding newer ways of motivating, resourcing and executing acts of terror. Unfortunately, there are also some countries who seek to undermine or subvert our collective resolve to fight terrorism. That cannot be allowed to pass.
The Prime Minister of Pakistan continues to publicly endorse the Taliban. He says the Taliban have broken the chains of slavery.
जो अभी अफगानिस्तान में गुलामी की जंजीरें तो तोड़ दी उन्होंने, लेकिन जो ज़हनी गुलामी की जंजीरें वो नहीं टूटती.
Was Afghanistan a slave country before the Taliban took over? Or are they slaves now to a terrorist regime backed by Pakistan and legitimized by America? Bureau Report, WION World is One.
So that's the Pakistani position, a terror state cheering a terror regime. What is China's game? What do the Chinese want from Afghanistan? Minerals, among other things. And this is something not commonly known. Afghanistan may be one of the poorest nations in the world, but it sits on a vast resource of mineral deposits. In 2010, American geologists said the worth of these deposits could be at least $1 trillion. 1 trillion, that's more zeros than the Taliban can count, perhaps. What sort of minerals are these? The ones that matter. Iron, copper, gold, lithium, cobalt, uranium, bauxite, sulfur, rare earths, gemstones, you name it, Afghanistan has it. And how much of it? Let me break it down for you. A 2010 report by Afghanistan's Ministry of Mines put the country's copper resource at almost 30 million tons. Another report from the same year said that there were another 28.5 million tons of copper in undiscovered deposits. That would bring the total to roughly 60 million tons, which, given the current prices at the London Metal Exchange, will be worth more than $500 billion. Next, iron ore. The same report said that Afghanistan had more than 2.2 billion tons of iron, of steel-making raw material iron ore. How much is this worth? More than $350 billion at current market prices. Then we have gold, the most favorable hedge against inflation. Afghanistan has a modest gold resource of at least 2,700 kilograms. It is spread in multiple areas of the country. The worth of this resource is estimated to be $170 million. What about lithium, which is being touted as the new oil, a resource crucial to the shift to renewable energy? Well, brace yourselves. In 2010, a US Department of Defense memo described Afghanistan as the Saudi Arabia of lithium, meaning it could be as crucial for the supply of lithium to the world as the Sheikhdom is for crude oil. The survey further said, if Afghanistan has a few years of calm, allowing the development of its mineral resources, it could become one of the richest countries in the area within a decade. But how big are the lithium deposits in Afghanistan? This the survey did not reveal. Perhaps China can. It's a world leader in mining minerals, a next-door neighbor of Afghanistan, and one of the few nations to formally acknowledge the Taliban's legitimacy. China is also looking to fill the void left by the US. It is establishing diplomatic ties with the Taliban already and will most certainly do business with the new regime. In 2008, China won a bid to exploit a copper mine in Afghanistan's Logar province, a project that is currently languishing. With a friendly Taliban in power, though, China may want to give it a new life. How? Through the Belt and Road Initiative. Pakistan is already tucked under this plan. It's only a matter of time that Afghanistan too falls in the trap. Last month, at a meeting between Taliban and Chinese Foreign Minister, Beijing said it will pursue a constructive role in Afghanistan's reconstruction, a move welcomed by the Taliban, which in turn invited China to play a key role in economic development of the country. But will China succeed? Dealing with an unstable nation is never easy, and China should know this. It has hopefully learned its lesson in Venezuela 6 years ago. Venezuela used to be China's favorite destination for investments. By 2013, it had provided Venezuela with a $40 billion credit line, but thanks to the oil downturn in 2014 and 2015, which crashed Venezuela's economy, $30 billion of that amount is still outstanding. Beijing is yet to get back its money. So China will do good to remember this nightmare before striking deals with the Taliban. As for the Taliban, they're sitting on resources worth $1 trillion. And this should be another reason that will add to the Taliban's legitimacy in the days to come. Where China sees opportunity, India sees another difficult neighbor, a Stone Age empire with 21st century weapons. It's a dangerous combination, to say the least. India remembers enough of the first Taliban regime. They created trouble in Kashmir, marched at Pakistan's orders, and left the whole region unstable. Not much has changed in 20 years, at least not ideologically. What's different is the Taliban's arsenal. We are talking about airplanes, guns and missiles, all thanks to the Americans. In 20 years of war, the US spent $28 billion on weaponry. A lot of it was handed over to the Afghan army. This is a cutting-edge war chest. And today, it is in Taliban control. How much firepower are we talking about? 2,000 armored vehicles, 2,000. 40 aircraft, including Black Hawk helicopters, Scan Eagle military drones, and possibly hundreds of infantry weapons. The ragtag militants from Kandahar now have an air force. This has to be the biggest headline of the American occupation. But how does this affect India? You see, the Taliban love to share, and who do they share with? Terrorists backed by Pakistan. Reports say the terror networks are already being revived. Lashkar-e-Toiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed are being pushed into Afghanistan. Apparently, they're not alone. Pakistani army advisors are joining them. They're guiding the Taliban, training them, and of course, indoctrinating Afghan youth. So America's war chest will not remain in Taliban hands. It will be used to stir trouble in Kashmir. We've seen this happen before. This time, the weapons are more sophisticated. Here's how this nexus works. The Taliban hand over the looted weapons to jihadists in Afghanistan. Some of these weapons are taken back to Pakistan. This is where the important handover takes place. Pakistan's ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence, provides these weapons to their terror proxies, the likes of Jaish-e-Mohammed and So what are India's options? Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar touched upon this at the United Nations. He talked about India's three main concerns. Listen in.
This is Susan from WION News. Will India recognize the Taliban, and what is India's position on the Taliban?
We've had long experiences with terrorism. I specifically mentioned the groups Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. Where we go on from now, the immediate issue is repatriation and working with partners, especially the US, as they control the airport. France also took some of our nationals. In terms of longer perspective, we have a relationship with the Afghan people, and we will continue with it.
So those are India's priorities: battling terror, rescuing Indians stuck in Afghanistan, and in the long run, a continued partnership with the Afghan people. What about recognizing the Taliban? Well, that depends on many factors. Will they keep their promises on rights and freedoms? Will they stop harboring terrorists? The indications are not good. But much like the rest of the world, India is waiting and watching. The foreign minister also met with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The two leaders promised to coordinate and cooperate in Afghanistan. This is a pressing issue for India, remember. New Delhi is running evacuation missions from Kabul, and America controls the airport. But what happens after the evacuation? The US is no longer a player, doesn't want to be one. Pakistan and China are already cheering the new regime. What kind of balance can India hope to achieve then? And more importantly, can the Taliban be trusted to keep this balance? Earlier today, we spoke to Dr. Christian Nelman. He's part of a team preparing intel reports on the Taliban, what they're doing in Kabul and who they're targeting. Dr. Nelman says anyone who worked for India is certainly at risk.
Well, I think anyone who has any country or individual or people, Afghan people who have collaborating also with Indians in Afghanistan are at risk. I think there's no doubt whatsoever on that.
And this is precisely the problem with the Taliban. They have no principles, no sense of trust or responsibility. They say Indian projects and investments are welcome, yet they steal Indian helicopters and take over India-built dams. They say Indian diplomatic presence is welcome, but here's what they did in Kandahar and Herat. They raided the Indian consulates. They drove off in vehicles parked inside, and apparently they also stole some documents. How do you deal with such volatile agents? With caution and concern. India is right to play the waiting game to see if the Taliban are indeed their own boss. But India cannot afford to wait forever. The Afghans will only suffer more. On Monday, we saw their desperation. We've been seeing it for all these days now. They grabbed at the wheels of a plane taking off from Kabul. We also saw those images. At least 2 people fell to their death. One of the victims was a 17-year-old football player, 17. And some people tried to profit from his misery.
Zaki Anwari wanted a future without the Taliban. Like thousands of Afghans, he too went to the Kabul airport on Monday. When he couldn't get a flight out, he grabbed onto the wheels of a US military aircraft. The plane took off. Zaki Anwari couldn't hold on. He was one of those victims who fell to his death. Zaki Anwari wasn't your average teenager. Zaki was a member of Afghanistan's national youth soccer team. He hailed from a low-income family, but that didn't stop him from donning the red jersey. Then the Taliban took over. Zaki's dream hit a dead end. He made a bid to escape, to find a better life outside his country. It was not to be. Zaki's story is the story of Afghan youth, of dreams shattered by a brutal takeover. Not everyone understands their plan. Some have turned it into a cruel joke, even a business opportunity. Look at this, t-shirts showing people falling from a military plane. Now look at this caption, Kabul Skydiving Club. It's horrendous and sick. Who came up with this? A company called T-Shirt at Low Price, headquartered in Singapore, selling these T-shirts across the world. They triggered a storm of anger online. This is what they were called: inhumane, disgusting, repulsive. The T-shirts were taken off the market, if only social media anger could end the misery of Afghans too. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
What's the biggest story of this Taliban takeover? Well, there are a few contenders to choose from. Was it Joe Biden's capitulation, the Afghan army surrender, or the Taliban's swift victory? Frankly, it's none of these. The biggest story of the week is the resistance of Afghan women. The Western media called them damsels in distress, incapable of defending themselves. How wrong they were. Afghan women did not shut themselves in their house. They're protesting, they're arranging safe passage for themselves, they're speaking out against the Taliban. These are no damsels in distress. Today, there was another protest in Kabul. Women turned up with placards. They chanted slogans demanding rights and freedoms. Remember, this is happening in Taliban-held Kabul.
These are all women who are working in government offices and in corporate sectors protesting for women's rights. We are protesting because we do not know what is going to happen to us. The women say we fought very long time for our rights. We don't want to lose what we have. We are demanding for democratic government in Afghanistan, and this government must be endorsed by UN. We women want all our rights that Islam gives to a woman.
These scenes were unimaginable 20 years ago, and it doesn't mean that the Taliban have changed. It means Afghan women have changed. Yesterday we told you about a female journalist who was taken off air by the Taliban. That list has now expanded. Khadija Amin of RTA Pashto was turned back from work. No explanation, no justification. She was asked to quote-unquote stay at home for a few days. And this isn't what the Taliban promised. But then again, are we surprised? Western countries may be naive enough to think the Taliban have turned soft, but we are not, nor are the Afghan women. Meet Meena Asadi. She's an Afghan karate champion. At the age of 12, she was forced to flee the country. Meena Asadi knows firsthand the horrors of the Taliban. She says there is nothing left for women athletes in the country. As for the Taliban's promises, she doesn't trust them one bit, she says.
Actually, everything is finished for athletes, women like me in Afghanistan, and we heard a report from Taliban that Taliban implemented some strict rules against women in some cities. They prevented women and girls from school and other activities. So once again, the darkest days came for women in Afghanistan. Absolutely no, I don't believe on Taliban, and they are the extremist party, and they don't believe on human rights and rights of women.
What are the options for women like Meena Asadi? The Taliban won't let them ply their trade, so what do? For some, the only option is to relocate. Can you imagine what that must feel like? To leave your homeland, and for what? To sing, to make movies, to play sports. Sometimes these journeys can be perilous. Let me show you what happened to prominent filmmaker Sehra Karimi. She posted this video the day the Taliban took Kabul. It's a terrifying watch. Karimi was in line at an ATM when she heard gunfire. People around her asked her to flee. She was scared, she was breathless, but she did not stop. She took her brothers and nieces and headed to the airport. Sehra Karimi successfully escaped the Taliban. She's in Ukraine today. This is how she described her frantic escape from Kabul.
The moment that we missed the first airplane, it was the most sad moment in my life, because I thought that, okay, we cannot go anymore, we stay. And then I started again. You know why? Because I am a fighter. I never give up. I never ever give up. I thought, no, I come to airport, so I need to. It wasn't about me. It was about my brother and his kids. I wanted, because I know that if they do something against me, they will hurt my family first. And they're small children, they're all girls, and I don't want that they witness something that they don't deserve.
All that pain, and for what? Her love for cinema. The world is playing trial and error with the Taliban, giving them a chance to show they have changed. What about the flip side? Gambling with women's lives and freedoms is not diplomacy. It cannot be a trade-off in political negotiations. And I can't believe all this has to be said. Afghan women have been given two choices: stay and risk your life, or escape the Taliban's terror. And both these choices are beyond unfair. This week, one part of an all-girls robotics team left Afghanistan. They plan to continue learning in Qatar. This is the same team that visited the United States in 2017. Back then, the US plugged it as a great achievement. Today, that same team has been broken up. One part in Qatar, the other in Afghanistan. That's the story of Afghan women. They're not relinquishing their rights. They plan to fight the Taliban as long as they can. But here's the question for America and its allies and the rest of the world. You used Afghan women to justify your occupation. Now you say rights cannot be defended at gunpoint. It's time to hold these politicians accountable for their hypocrisy. So keep tweeting us on #SaveAfghanWomen. Keep the campaign going. It's just getting started. In India and elsewhere, we often complain of how long things take. For instance, one has to wait to get an appointment with a doctor. Most of us expect instant appointments, instant tests, instant results. But what I'm about to tell you may sound unreal. It is true, though. More than 124,000 people, 124,000 people are in a 3-month-long waiting list for various health tests in the United Kingdom. More than 306,000 people, more than 3 lakh people are in a 6-week waiting list for the same purpose. And these are all official figures from one of the UK's most prized institutions, the National Health Service, NHS. And they tell you how even the so-called first world is not immune to problems we feel only exist in this part of the world.
124,000. That's the number of patients in a 3-month-long waiting list for health checkups in the United Kingdom. This is under its most prized institution, the National Health Service, or the NHS. And wait till you hear about the weekly waiting list. More than 306,000 people have been waiting for more than 6 weeks for an NHS test. Why exactly are they waiting? Because doctors are still struggling with COVID backlogs. A quick look at this graph of various acute trusts that provide health services within the NHS. It tells you the scale of this crisis. In June 2019, these 5 NHS trusts had a waiting list that averaged well below 10,000 people. By June 2021, look at how these figures have changed. For some trusts, they stretch beyond the 15,000 mark individually. What sort of tests are these patients waiting for? More than 23,000 people need a cardiology test. More than 16,000 need to undergo gastroscopy. At least 16,000 need to have a colonoscopy. 15,000 people want an ultrasound. More than 14,000 need an MRI test. At least 5,000 require a DEXA scan. And more than 4,000 need to undergo neurophysiology. There are many more tests and many more people and a lot of worries. Doctors in the UK are alarmed. They have described the waiting list for diagnostics as incredibly concerning. Dr. Richard Wattray, the chair of the British Medical Association Committee, has said, such a drastic estimated increase in the diagnostic waiting list represents a healthcare crisis. Behind these figures are patients who are left waiting far too long for a diagnosis and therefore treatment. The fears are not manufactured. There could be patients out there with conditions like cancer, which require early diagnosis and subsequent treatment that has a significant impact on their chances of survival. British doctors say the pandemic has disrupted the delivery of healthcare, no doubt. But they also blame their leadership for not allocating more resources, both human and financial. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching. Have a good weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
そうなんです。ちょっとねタイミングがあれですけども、群馬、神奈川、新潟、九州